Hello everybody, welcome to a special all-Canadian edition of Fat City Vinyl. This is a video response to a series of videos put out by a couple of other vinyl community channels. Cameron Zyrina was diverse and eclectic tastes, but has one of the strongest world music collections in the vinyl community. And Hippie DJ Kit over in Greece, who's a newer member, but has just shown an incredible collection of psychedelic music, Latin. So it goes without saying, check both those guys out if you haven't yet. So they have recently shown their Canadian vinyl, so I've been inspired to do the same. I'm always impressed watching both, not just theirs, but other vinyl community videos. These guys showing records that I'm blown away they know, sometimes ones I don't even know, never heard of, and I've lived here all my life in Canada. So I'm going to show my response. They've both looked at 60s and 70s records, kind of more the late 60s era, I guess you'd say. I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to tighten my focus a little bit and show records related to my specific region, which is the westernmost province of Canada, British Columbia, kind of Vancouver general area. It's where I'm from. I'm going to expand my focus in one sense and show some records that maybe you wouldn't associate with my area that have some connection, although it might not necessarily be by artists from my area. So I'm going to get right off to it. The earliest records I have are some jazz ones. Now, jazz was popular in the 1950s. There was a neighborhood in Vancouver called Hogan's Alley, which was an African-Canadian enclave in the city, which was kind of there were bars and places to hear music there. It was Jimi Hendrix had family up here. He would make the trek north from Seattle as the rock and roll era got started. But going all the way back to 1951 here, this was a thrift record find I found a while back, Louie Armstrong in Canada. This is a live date from 1951 at the Exhibition Gardens. Louie here appearing with Jack Teagarden on trombone, Fada Hines on piano, and Velma Middleton adding some vocals. Him and Louie do a duet on That's My Desire, where they're just about cracking up laughing and the crowd is just eating it up. And kind of a great cover shot of Louie here with his suitcases, the life of the itinerant musician. And there's kind of an interesting anecdote on the liner notes here. Liner notes by Jack Cullen, who was a well-known newsman, media personality, I believe, at the time. This record's actually from 1967. Came on the Dogwood label, quite an obscure one, I think. Local press, I'm sure. But Louie had attempted to check into a hotel in Vancouver, was turned away, had to go to another one where they would rent him a room, and showed up a few minutes late to the performance. He walks on stage after the band has been playing for a couple of minutes to the applause. So interesting find there, thrift find. Another jazz one. I found this pretty recently, actually. CD on this one. Oscar Peterson Trio, appearing in Vancouver in 1958 at the Orpheum Theatre. Another live date. Orpheum Theatre, one of the most historic venues in town, still active. Getting into the rock and roll era, the first DJ who played rock and roll in Vancouver was named Red Robinson, and I had occasion to meet him at one point, several years ago. He got to introduce Elvis on stage in 1957, I believe it was, when he appeared here, and then several years later in 1964 for the Beatles. And a few months ago I found this CD, the Beatles tapes, Beatles in the Northwest. This is culled from press conferences and interviews relating to their appearances in Vancouver and Seattle. It's not actual music on here. Apparently the actual concerts are, or at least the Vancouver one is out. I've not heard it yet. Getting into the rock and roll era proper, as it truly began to take off in the city. I recently picked this up. It is The History of Vancouver Rock and Roll Volume 4. The back there. There's 3 other volumes, of course, of this. I just started with this one. This was put out by Neptune Records in the 1980s. It's the longest running record store in town. I got this actually at Neptune Records. They're still operating today. And I bought this direct from Rob Frith, the owner who put this out. And this was still sealed when I got it. So great compilation of rare singles on here. Comes with a booklet telling all about the history of the bands. It's the Be In Stanley Park, 1970-ish, I believe, on that one. So you have a collection of singles here from obscure groups that never got around to recording an LP. The Northwest Company, who else? The Shockers, William Tell and the Marksmen, and one single by a group called the Eternal Triangle. Now, the Eternal Triangle counted as one of their members Tom Northcott, who would go on to a local folk music career. I have one single by him on the New Syndrome label. Think about 1970-ish on this one. But the member that would go on to the most international fame was a young lady named Susan Pesclovich, who met up with a young musician named Terry Jacks and eventually married him, taking his surname. And as the Poppy Family, they hit big with a song called Which Way You Going, Billy? Now, there's two versions of this debut album cover. This seems to be the more common one around town, but there's also one that shows the entire band. But the record label, not definitely knowing which way their bread was buttered on, put the stunning Susan Jacks front and center, holding a poppy. But in kind of the hippie ideals of the time, it was kind of a multi-racial, mixed race, mixed gender group with Satwant Singh on tabla and sitar, Craig McCaw, Terry Jacks, singer-songwriter, and of course Susan Jacks, lead vocals. Now, I'm such a Poppy Family nerd, I have two copies of this. One on the blue London label, and one on a black. And I also have the Which Way You Going single. Now, all these Poppy Family records I've found at thrift stores over the years. The LPs, they do go for a bit of money sometimes here. The Poppy Family put out one further album, Poppy Seeds. By this time they'd kind of Terry had kind of pared the group down just to the duo of him and Susan and dismissed the other members. And their sound is a mix of kind of light psych, very dreamy at times, bit of country in there, bit of pop, 60s pop. After those two albums, the Jackses would separate. Susan would move to Nashville and pursue a solo career, starting with I Thought of You Again, 1973 on here. Goldfish Records. Terry Jacks himself would start his own solo career. I got one by him, You Don't Fight the Sea, and this contained his smash hit Seasons in the Sun, cover of the song by Jacques Brel, which was a massive hit in Canada. Demonstration copy there. Terry Jacks. Both Susan and Terry are still around, still living locally. They both had some serious health issues in 2016 and were hospitalized for long periods of time. Apparently they're both on the mend. The Poppy Family, minus Terry, with the rest of the original lineup, did a reunion concert 2014, I believe, which was well received. Now, one of the other groups on that history of Vancouver rock and roll is a couple of unreleased tracks by The Collectors, which is another well-known group that helped put the Vancouver music scene on the map. In 1968, they came out with their self-titled debut, The Collectors. This is a pressing on green Warner Brothers label. Now, The Collectors, a very psychedelic, kind of a classical, Baroque influence in there as well. They have side 2 on here is an entire suite, side-long suite, reminiscent of the Doors, The End at times, with some freak-out elements and kind of a spoken word monologue at the end, quite trippy. But the big song on here is Lydia Purple, kind of the only song not written by the band, but you would hear that on local classic rock radio for years afterwards. The Collectors. About this time, members of the Collectors also played on the Electric Prunes Mass in F minor album. Now the Collectors came back with the Grass and Wild Strawberries album. This one's a gatefold. And that is on New Syndrome label again. Now this has lyrics by playwright George Riga, who would go on to write The Ecstasy of Rita Jo, a groundbreaking play examining Native Canadian issues, which was first put on in Vancouver. I showed this a few videos ago. Quite a lovely gatefold cover on here. And this contains a musical accompaniment to the play with Willie Dunn, the famous Native singer-songwriter, included on the Native North America compilation from Light in the Attic, and Mortifee, and words by George Riga. Getting back to the Collectors, they would go through a lineup change. Lead singer Howie Vickers would leave, putting the focus of the band on the second vocalist Bill Henderson, who reformed the group as Chilliwack, being named after a city about half an hour away from where I'm recording this video, down the Trans-Canada Highway. Chilliwack's first two albums would pursue less of a psych and more of a progressive folk sound, I would want to say, with, again, some of those long suites. They remake 17th Summer, which was originally done on the Grass and Wild Strawberries album with words by George Riga, with a very tribal, native-inspired drumming section. Chilliwack, another album by them, 2 LP one here. These are both just called Chilliwack, both from around 70, 71-ish. Gatefold on that one. And again, this has quite a few of these long, progressive kind of suites. Lonesome Mary was kind of the hit off this one that you would hear on classic rock radio for decades afterwards. I feel like I keep referencing the radio. I wonder if younger people even get that. But back in those days, that was how you heard of all these songs and all these artists, how you learned about music. Another group that was never got around to recording an LP at the time was the Seeds of Time. Late 60s on this one. I found this CD in a thrift quite a few years ago. This has some old recordings, live recordings from late 60s, early 70s, and some newly recorded songs. Members of this group would go on to form Prism, which was a very well-known, commercially successful Canadian group of the 70s. There's a strong folk tradition in the area going back to the 60s and still continuing to this day. One of the more well-known albums around town is the Pied Pumpkin String Ensemble, a la Mode. My copy is on the Squash label. This is real hippie kind of folk in kind of that bluegrassy, rootsy, Grateful Dead kind of style. And it includes Joe Mock, who was in Mock Duck, one of the groups included on that History of Vancouver rock and roll LPs. Sherry Ulrich was pretty well known as a solo performer in later years. This was one of my better thrift finds, actually. I could actually put this in one of my best thrift find videos. It is Comox and Friends, 1974 on this one. Local press on Hookah Records. This is some sun-dappled, woodsy, rural folk music. Folk and country rock, I would say. Side 1 is more country rock. Side 2 really gets into that pastoral folk kind of sound. If you know the Fleet Foxes, the more modern group, this is the kind of sound that they were aiming for. These guys had it in 1974. Kind of a obscure local group. Very nice LP though. And great sounding LP actually too, for one of those floppy kind of 70s pressings. Another local folk artist, Valdi, based kind of, I would say Vancouver Island, Gulf Islands area. Family gathering. Again, that hippie West Coast folk vibe. One of the artists on that Ecstasy of Rita Jo album was Anne Mortifee, who has kind of a pop, kind of musical theater sound. This was her debut album, Baptism, with that absolutely gorgeous West Coast First Nations art-inspired cover. And again, she was based kind of out of that Gulf Islands scene where a lot of the artists, the hippies, would end up settling. She was married for several years to Paul Horn, the jazz flute musician. He was based in this area as well. One of his LPs is called Inside 2, sequel to his Inside the Taj Mahal album. And this is recorded locally in Victoria, BC, including him playing with the orca whale sounds, killer whale. Quite new agey, experimental music, avant-garde, I guess you would say. I don't know, avant-garde, but definitely new agey. Getting into the early 70s singer-songwriter era, there was C.B. Victoria. I think his real name is Alvin Coppard or something like that. Edwin Coppard, rather. C.B. Victoria, the name is kind of a pun on Victoria, BC, the capital city. This is very much in that singer-songwriter vein. The hit song on here, kind of a minor Canadian hit, was Come and See My Man. A lot of people thought it was an Elton John single because he has quite a bit of that early Elton John sound. That appeared on the Janus label. Getting into some albums you wouldn't necessarily associate with this area. H.P. Riot, actually a San Francisco band based out of the Hunters Point area, where there was race riots in the 1960s, hence the name. They toured Western Canada extensively and recorded their debut album here in Vancouver at, where does it say, Can-Base Studios. Mid-70s on this one, I think. Kickin' funk and soul on here. Another absolute classic album recorded here at Can-Base Studios. Michael Viner's incredible bongo band, Bongo Rock. Of course, known for Apache, massively sampled tune. It's on Pride Records, 1973. As the glam movement took hold in other parts of the world, it translated here too. We had a group called Sweeney Todd, which was very much in that glam rock kind of sound. Lead singer was a guy called Nick Gilder. Their biggest hit off this album was Roxy Roller. Nick Gilder would leave for a solo career, put out City Nights album. Big hit single off this was Hot Child in the City. Sweeney Todd would carry on, put out another album called If Wishes Were Horses, this time featuring a new lead vocalist, a young kid by the name of Brian Guy Adams. Doesn't look too much like a guy in this picture. Doesn't really sound like one either. But Brian Adams, of course, would go on to massive solo career in the 1980s and beyond. His first solo release, actually, after leaving Sweeney Todd, was a disco single, Let Me Take You Dancing. Apparently he's completely disowned this song. It's not available anywhere else, but actually pretty decent song. I like this one. Now, just to show a bit of reggae, not really a strong area for reggae records, but this one was released locally. It is a live record by Ras Michael and the Sons of Negus, Promised Land Sounds, and released locally on the Lionsgate label. Lionsgate, famous bridge going to North Vancouver here. And this was put out by George Barrett, longtime local radio DJ. He's been on the air consistently since about 1976, I think. Met him once or twice. And also by Alex Brojgart. I've had some conversations with him. He's still local, but more in the interior of BC. And he started a label called Peacemaker Records that put out a couple of CD releases. One was Yabby You Meets Tommy McCook in dub, Sounds of the 70s, released out of Vancouver. This was kind of a rare and collectible CD at one point. I'm not sure if it still is, but I found that many years ago. And also put out some new music with the legendary roots reggae artist Yabby the You Man. Yabby You. These are late 80s, I would think. No, 1995. Mid-90s on those ones. So that is what I've got for local music, guys. Hope you enjoyed. There's lots more I could show you from various parts of Canada, but I thought I would keep this kind of focused on my area. Maybe there'll be a future installment down the road. So hope you enjoyed, guys. Take care.